So welcome everyone to the panel discussion. My name's Hannah. I'm a member of the Student Forum Organising Committee. I'd like to first introduce Emily Moreton, who will be the moderator for this event. Emily is the Standards and Code Lead at the Australian Council for International Development, or ACFID. And ACFID is the peak body for Australian NGOs involved in international development and humanitarian action. Emily's been at ACFID for over 3 years and recently completed her Master of Applied Anthropology and Development at the Australian National University. She has a background in education and has worked in Indonesia and China as a teacher trainer. We're super lucky to have Emily with us, and she'll also be popping into our networking event at 4 o'clock this afternoon. But at the moment, I'll just hand over to Emily to introduce the wonderful panel she's put together for us and to go through some housekeeping for this session.
Thanks, Hannah, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to what I hope will be a really useful session for you all today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which we're all joining from today, all around Australia or perhaps even internationally. Here in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, before we begin. So as Hannah said, I'm from ACFID, which is the peak body for Australian NGOs that work in international development and humanitarian sector. To be a member of ACFID, organisations must meet a set of standards of good practice, which is known as the ACFID Code of Conduct. And my role involves helping organisations to understand and apply the standards, as well as working with government and other bodies around issues to do with standards. So I'm a relative newcomer to the sector. And I know how difficult it can sometimes be to get started or to figure out who to talk to find out more information. So hopefully today will be a bit of a practical and helpful session for you all. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Leo Dungo and Michelle Emerson on our panel today. And I'll introduce them in a bit more detail later on, but Michelle and Leah have a wide range of experiences in the sector, and they'll be sharing a little bit of their own personal journeys, as well as some advice and suggestions as we go along. So there will be plenty of time for questions today, and I encourage you to start thinking about them now. But please feel free to type any questions into the Q&A box in your Zoom screens as we go, or on the Hoover app, and we will be checking them and getting back to you on some answers. So to get us started today, we're really interested to find out a bit more about who's joining us in this session. So we have a little bit of a poll to get us started, and you're going to need to go to a website. So you can either use your phone or you can use your browser to do that. So the website that you'll need to go to is called mentimeter.com. So if you just type that in there, you won't need to log into the website or do anything too fancy, and you can enter in the code for this poll specifically. So I'll just give you a little bit of time to do that. And maybe just, if you're having any trouble finding it or have any questions, maybe put it into the chat box. All right, I can see that one person has already found it, so that's promising. So once you're in there, you'll be prompted with a question. You just need to select the answer that's most appropriate for you. And we'll give people a little bit of time to do this, and then I'll share the results as well as we go. Fantastic. So it looks like we have people with a really wide range of experience here. And this is just figure out who we've got with us today. So all right, I'll give you a little bit more time. I can see we've probably got about half the people who found it. So I'm just going to share the results with you now, so you can also see who's joining us and what kind of experience we have. So we have quite a few people who have worked overseas a bit, quite a few who are really new to the sector and haven't had any working or volunteering experience. I imagine there's probably a couple of people who've ticked a few boxes in there as well, which is great. So a whole bunch of different people there. All right, just give you 10 more seconds and we'll move on to the next one. All right, let's have a look at the next one. So you should be able to go to the next question now. So this is just a bit more of a free form. So you might have one question that you want to know from this session, or just a general point. What is it that you'd like to actually hear from us about today? Why did you come along? Bit of general advice, that's always good. Lessons learned. How to get started in volunteering, that's always a good one. Lots of connections, ways that graduates can link up, get started, fantastic. So hopefully we'll cover quite a few of these today. And if you do have specific questions, we'll also have our contact details at the end, so you can get in touch afterwards if we haven't managed to get to it. Yeah, non-academic careers post-PhD, that's always a good challenge. Michelle might like to speak to that one later. Some really practical tips, resources, networking, a bit more about what the sector is actually about. Fantastic. All right, well, we might leave it there. That's really, really helpful for us to know that. So thank you for sharing. And like I say, if you do have any questions as we go along, just pop them in the chat box there. So before Leah and Michelle speak to us today, I thought I'd start just with a brief overview a bit about who's who in the sector. What do we mean by the development sector, where you might look for jobs, how the different parts interact and work together. And unless you've actually worked in the sector before, it can be quite challenging to know how it operates and where to start. And I can see some of those things coming through in your comments. So this is, of course, a very simplified diagram, but let me just make sure you can see it. There we go. So this diagram just tries to show you some of the key players that are working in the sector. And being biased, and working for ACFID, there are, of course, Australian NGOs at the centre. And NGOs usually have a really close relationship with their partner organisations and the communities overseas. And they're usually implementing their own programs. So NGOs collaborate a lot with each other and others in the sector. So for example, they might hire an independent consultant to provide some technical expertise on a particular topic. They might co-design a research project with an academic, but NGOs may also implement projects that are managed by other contractors. So there are also managing contractors, and this is a term that I found a lot of people starting out in the sector aren't particularly familiar with. So these are companies, essentially, who manage projects and sometimes implement development activities themselves. So some examples of some large managing contractors that you might have heard of are companies like Cardno, Palladium, GHD. And managing contractors will often be hired by DFAT and other large donors to implement their aid program, or sometimes as well to provide specialist advice. So independent consultants are, as the name suggests, individuals or perhaps small groups who often specialise in a particular area. So for example, maybe gender equality, safeguarding, organisational development, even compliance and risk management. So these kinds of roles require some level of expertise and experience, and it might be something that you would consider a bit later on in your career, but they're a really important part of the sector too. Then there's DFAT, so the Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and other government agencies who fund and work with other parts of the sector to deliver Australia's aid program. Universities and research networks, such as the RDI network, also have a really important role. They often collaborate with other partners across the sector to produce applied research. They are also involved in monitoring and evaluation and just generally sharing knowledge about best practice and research that's out there that's relevant. So other important groups internationally are, of course, the UN agencies, other international NGOs, donors such as the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, and the myriad of other organisations and groups that make up civil society internationally. And down in the corner, we've got volunteer programs. And while these are often run by some of the other actors that are on the screen, such as government or NGOs, they do form a really important part of the sector and are something to keep in mind as you're considering your job options and how to get in. So often people start out working in the NGO sector, occasionally government, and then later on might shift over to contracting or consulting work. But of course, it's never as simple as that. But I thought I'd share some information about what NGOs are out there and what roles are available as well. So if you're thinking about working in an NGO and want to know what agencies are out there, a really good place to start is to look at who's part of ACFID's membership. So the majority of all jobs in international development NGOs are within ACFID's membership organisations. So you can find a full list of these on ACFID's website, and there's a really diverse range of organisations working in the sector. So most of you will already know some of the bigger players, such as Oxfam, World Vision, CARE, but I'd encourage you to also look widely and look at the smaller and medium-sized organisations as well. So you might also be interested in a particular area of focus. So you might be interested in organisations working in environmental programming or in gender equality, and you can take a look at the list and see from their websites as well what they're doing. So you can see these are just a few stats that might be of interest. You can see from the graph on the left that many of ACFID's members have less than 10 employees. And only a handful of organisations actually employ more than 100 people. So there's a really large number of organisations in the sector that are relatively small. But these can be a really great place to start out. And often they can give you experience doing a wide range of roles that you might not get in some of the larger agencies. So there's also often part-time work available, which can be a useful first step even while you're still studying. And of course, volunteering continues to be a really important way in which people contribute to the sector. And this is not just when you start out, but often people are volunteering in multiple roles, even whilst they might be working in a particular organisation. So one question that I had when I was starting out was, what roles can I actually do? Like, what is out there? What is my university degree, my PhD going to help me do? Like, where are the jobs? And like any sector, there are a huge range of skills and experiences that are valuable, no matter who you end up working for. So this slide lists some of the possible roles. No doubt there are others, but NGOs are, of course, organisations. They require governing, financial management, management of their donors, grants, fundraising. And many of the roles, particularly in Australia, are about enabling the organisation to operate so that funds and support can then be given to local partner organisations overseas. So you will see a lot of roles in this governance and business operations area. There are, of course, also roles in programming, both in Australia and overseas, although there is a shift more and more towards having local staff and partner organisations actually implementing the programs overseas. So that's something to keep in mind if that's an area of work that you're interested in. If you're interested in policy or advocacy work or building on your research skills from uni, many medium and larger agencies will have roles specifically for this, or maybe look for organisations which have this in their mandate specifically. So one example of that is the International Women's Development Agency, who do a lot of advocacy work. And if you have specialised knowledge or qualifications, then these could be applied in more technical roles as well. So you could build on a previous career if that's relevant for you, or you might like to look to train in a particular area, for example, child protection, disability inclusion, or gender equality. So those are some of the key areas in the sector as well. So the development sector does have a bit of a reputation for using too many acronyms and terminology that can be hard to understand, or maybe isn't clear what it's actually about. So please don't feel silly. And if you're not sure what these roles mean or want to know more, just pop it into the chat box or the Q&A. So I'd encourage you to read job ads to get a bit of a sense of what different roles involve, and you will always be able to build on the skills that you're developing, even if you don't start out in your dream job. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a snapshot of the development sector in Australia. Like I said, please feel free to add any questions in as we go. So I'd now like to introduce Leah Odongo to share some of her experiences and reflections with us. So Leah is the Deputy Executive Director and Program Director at Australian Lutheran World Service. Leah has over 12 years of hands-on experience in international development, and she's spent a number of years working in refugee camps and their host communities in the Eastern Horn of Africa, and most recently with communities impacted by poverty, injustice and disasters in East Asia, Pacific and Sub-Saharan Africa. So a real global perspective. And Leah is also a human rights lawyer and has a real interest in strengthening development practice through policy accountability processes. And Leah's an active participant in lots of different groups and networks across the sector. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to share with us today. So over to you, Leah.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily, and thanks everyone for the invite. I just thought that presentation you shared was exceptional. I wished someone would have shared that with me when I started out in the sector. But look, as Emily has already introduced me, my name is Leah Odongo, and I'm the Program Director and the Deputy Executive Director at Australian Lutheran World Service. We are a medium-sized organization here in Australia, but a member of a global affiliate, Lutheran World Federation, that is much larger than our size here in Australia. In addition to my day job, I serve in a number of boards as well in the sector, and also in various committees, including the ACFID Code of Conduct Committee. Look, I have 10 minutes and I just had so much to share, and I narrowed down to things that I think would be most important for you. I'll leave a lot of room for questions later on. I'd start with my entry into the sector, which was almost by accident, to be honest. As Emilia said, my training is law, and I used to work in a human rights commission back in Kenya, which is my home country. And I stumbled on refugees just by chance, by the virtue of the fact that they would come to complain about a lot of injustices that they were facing, mostly in the hands of the local police there. And it got me really curious to get to understand what the situation is like for refugees. So I was young, I had time in my hands. I thought I'll look for a job in a refugee camp and I'll go and work for a year, and then I'll come back to my law stuff. And that's exactly what I did. A door opened up and I got a job in one of the refugee camps in Kenya and found myself in the sector. And what started out as a one-year trial turned out to be now probably 15 years going in this sector. And really listening to other people in the sector, their journey and entry into the sector always seems to be pretty much similar, except for people like you who make a conscious decision to want to make a difference. And I feel really honored to be amongst you. Often the calling is not motivated by glamour or money, because that's not what this sector offers much. It is often a deep-seated desire to make a difference in the world. And for all of you who are pursuing this as a career, it's a real honor to be sitting here virtually in your presence. What I've learned in the sector, I'll focus on three things, three tips for you as you start. A bit of it has been covered by Emily. I was actually quite surprised when I started out and went to a refugee camp to realize just how broad the sector was. My initial understanding was that, you know, it was a lot of social work, but then I found doctors, I found IT people. There was room for lawyers like myself. And the diversity of the sector was just incredible. I think this is one of the sectors that has so many opportunities for anyone trying out. And unlike in the past where we learned on the job and specialize on the job, I think the one tip that I could give you as you start out is to specialize if you can. Specialize on something that can make a difference using the backdrop of your training in international development. You could specialize in monitoring and evaluation. This is one of the areas that is still quite new, doesn't have lots of expertise in. You could specialize in IT. A lot of things are going digital in country, and it always helps to have that extra skill. But it is different when you get the skill without the background of international development. And the advantage you have is that you do have the training in international development. So if you want to specialize in one way or another in an area that is of greater interest for you, I think there would be a lot of advantage in that. Another thing that I learned that I think nobody would have prepared me for was the pace of change in the sector. When I moved into the refugee camp as a young lawyer, full of energy, wanting to make a difference, I wanted to see change immediately. And as you can correctly guess, I was really disappointed when that change didn't happen as quickly as I wanted it to happen. But the trick is to persist. What I've learned over the years that I've been in this sector is that the change happens slowly, but it does happen, and you make a difference in people's lives. And the people who have given up too soon as they get into the sector, they get a bit disillusioned and they think, no, this is not really what I thought it would be. And I'd give an example of a longitudinal study that we did with one of our partners in Africa, in Burundi, where we followed the life of one family that we started to support about 14 years ago. And the officers that were in that role prior to my time documented the situation of the family when they first moved back to Burundi as refugees after many years in a neighboring country and had nothing. And the support that they were given really was just house material to construct a decent house for the family and some startup kit in terms of seeds and tools for planting the seeds. And then over the years, they've tracked to see how the family is doing. And I last visited the family in 2019, which was about 12 years into the support. The support hadn't gone on for 12 years, but it was 12 years since the first time that they received support. And listening to the story of this woman who now was a leader in their community and looking at her farm and seeing how established she was, I really wished that the officers that were there before my time could have seen that. But anyway, the lesson I drew from that was that you persist. Sometimes you won't see the change yourself, but the fact is that you're making a change and it will be evident at some point. So I wish someone would have told me that. I would have been more patient with myself. I would have been more committed probably and done my bit, left it, and just known that somehow it would materialize into something better. And lastly, I think what I didn't realize as well as when I got into the sector was the two phases of learning. So I finished my degree. I had all the skills that I thought I could apply in the setup of a refugee context. But what I didn't realize was that I was just going to begin another set of learning. And this was learning at the feet of the community members. You take your theory, but the practice of it, you really have to learn from the communities how to utilize it. And the contexts are always so different. I'm amazed when I visit communities in Indonesia or in Papua New Guinea, and then I go to South Sudan, how similar yet very different these communities are. And it takes a willingness to really understand that your knowledge is not the perfect solution, that the communities just need, you need to understand the communities and to work with them to bring the change that you desire or that you're hoping to contribute through your work. And the beautiful thing about this learning has been just how much it impacts on other aspects of your life. I think the sector exposes you to things that, just make you a better person, really. You get to appreciate life so differently. And of course, there's always an extra bonus when you can travel to visit different people, see how people live. And it's always interesting. Most of the times what you see advertised in other countries are touristy places, but I think the real experience is with the people in the communities, in the village, living real lives. And that's a benefit that comes with the sector. And even if you're not able to travel, I think just knowing that you're making a life in someone's life is just a reward in itself. I think this is one of those sectors that just gives more than you actually give as a practitioners. I'll leave you with those 3 tips because I know Michelle has some great ones to top up, and I'd also like to answer specific questions as well. In terms of the highs of the sector, I think, again, just going back to what I had discussed earlier, seeing the change in people's lives, seeing what difference your small bit makes in someone's life and in a generation to come is a reward that nothing can compensate you sufficiently for. But apart from that, it's also just seeing resilience, determination in people's lives. I remember going to Kakuma refugee camp and hearing the stories of people who had fled from war in South Sudan, and then seeing them after a period of time, putting all that aside and rebuilding their lives. And every time I watch children run to school, laughing and giggling as if there's with no care in the world, it was just such a joy to watch that. I think that remains one of the all-time highs that you experience over and over again, no matter where you visit. Every time you go and you see people surviving, stories of determination and resilience, it leaves you a better person, and it just makes the job very rewarding. Some of the lows in the sector, and there are lows in the sector as well, is coming face to face with some of life's injustices. I'm reminded of my first experience receiving refugees that were coming into a refugee camp from a drought-stricken country, that was Somalia, in 2012, and listening to the stories of the newly arriving families. And one particular story has refused to leave me even after so many years. And we're talking to this woman and asking her what her journey was like, and wanting to know how many children she'd come to the camp with. And she said, oh, well, I started off with 6 children. The youngest couldn't survive. I fed, because it's several days of traveling, and they just didn't have enough food. It's survival for the fittest. And she said the child was so malnourished. They fed the children anything, dirt, whatever they could. And when they realized that the child was not going to make it and the rest couldn't wait for her, she had to leave the child behind because she knew that the child was going to die in a few hours anyway. And as a mother, that just tore me apart. So a really low in this sector is coming face to face with some of these kinds of injustices, of people who've been separated from their loved ones, of people who really can't trace anyone and have nowhere to go back to. But the good news is that we are in the sector to make a difference, and there's something that you can do about it. You may not be able to replace that woman's child or do something, but whatever little you can do to make a difference always goes a long way. So it's a law that can turn around through the work that we do. I'll just wrap up by reflecting on some of the current trends. Emily already touched a bit on it. Prior to COVID, there was already a big shift towards what we call the grant bargain in the sector. And this was really shifting the power back to local agencies to drive their own agenda. But what COVID has done is it's accelerated this process. And the big question that's left, even for us as practitioners, is, do we still have a role? What's the future going to look like? And my personal reflection is that the sector is still going to be needed. We still have a role in the sector. It will not be as it was in the past, which, in all truth and honesty, the balance has always tilted more heavily towards the donor countries in terms of how much power we hold. And we have gone into the communities with the wrong assumptions that we are the experts. I think the shift is really back to what it always has meant to be, where we join those that are implementing on the ground as equal partners, as critical friends, as trusted colleagues and team members, and not as experts better than them. So I would just like to encourage you to take heart and know that this is not a career that is becoming obsolete. We still have a place to play, and that place is important. And when I reflect on the new entrants into the field who have no baggage of, what the past has been, I think the key really is in your hands to accelerate this new era that we are getting into, a new era that should always have been anyway from the past. So I'll end by that and just stop here. I'll wait for the comments and any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. You've raised some really interesting points and challenging points as well, I think, about how the sector has changed, but also I think your point about the need for persistence is very true and one that resonates with me as well. So thank you so much for sharing those reflections. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle now. So Michelle Emerson is an international development consultant based in Sydney, and she has particular interests in public health, advocacy and gender. So her development career has taken a bit of an unusual, a little bit like Leah, and non-linear path through the Australian NGO sector, academia, consulting and the UN, including stints of volunteering. So Michelle has degrees in gender studies and public health, including a PhD in public health from the University of Sydney. She was also an Australian Youth Ambassador and is currently working for the Specialist Health Service, which provides health advice to DFAT. So a really wide range of experiences. So over to you, Michelle, to share some of your tips and thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you, Leah, and to everyone for being here today. It's great to be able to join you. I'm speaking to you today from Wongal country in the inner west of Sydney. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners here and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous people who might be with us today. Like Leah, I've got so much I'd like to share. I really hope I don't speak too fast. Thank you, by the way, to Holly for the captioning. If there's something you just don't catch or you haven't been able to follow, my apologies. I'm happy to come back to it during Q&A or in the chat later. So I guess at least some elements of Leah's career path look like maybe what you think yours will too. And it's probably what I thought mine was going to look like, except that didn't quite happen. So I had to make it up a bit. I like to think my experience is a good counterpoint to Leah's because I can tell you a bit about some of the other opportunities out there in the sector, most of which Emily helpfully mentioned in her intro. So to go back a bit, my interest in international development goes back to a Saturday afternoon when I was about 10. It was raining, I was stuck indoors, I turned on the TV and saw a documentary featuring the American political economist Susan George and her then very timely critique of the Bretton Woods institutions and their effect on human development. I'm not quite sure what this says about me, but at the time I thought this was completely fascinating, and I've been completely fascinated by the sector and everything about it ever since. Once I started at uni, I volunteered at Oxfam's office here in Sydney. I can't quite recall how I settled on Oxfam. I think it might have had something to do with how they spoke about women and development. I didn't do anything particularly structured or high-powered. For better or worse, the modern internship didn't exist then. And right through my time at uni, I just kept reading about development and learning everything I could. When I finished my undergrad degree, I needed to see if I could parlay this interest into a career without even then having much sense of what I thought that was going to look like. And I was, as Emily mentioned, able to go on an Australian Youth Ambassadorship to Bangladesh in 2004, 2005. It was an incredibly energising, thought-provoking time that made me just feel alive with a sense of potential in myself and in what was possible in the world. And even now I draw on that thinking and learning almost every day. DFAT has retired the ACFID program now, but there is still AVI, which you may know about. It doesn't have a specific intake for young people. And these days, of course, increasingly in the last year, there is online volunteering as well. So I came back to Sydney after that and did a Master of International Public Health, an MIPH at the University of Sydney. I already knew from having spent some time around Oxfam that agencies are sometimes a bit ambivalent about development studies degrees. They'd say, yeah, well, that's nice, but what can you actually do? And I'd been fortunate enough to spend time in Bangladesh with people who worked in public health. It was a discipline I'd known a little bit about before I went, and then I saw firsthand how good health underpinned the whole of the rest of the human and social development agenda. So I thought, yeah, that's where I want to be. Then I spent a year as a research assistant in the School of Public Health at UNSW. I'd done research work before. I knew I liked university environments and the people I met there, the work we did together. Plus, until I established myself, I needed something to financially supplement my development activities. And then after that, I came back to Sydney Uni to do my PhD. Now, higher degree research is probably a whole separate topic, one I'm happy to talk about later, though I'm guessing there might even be a separate session on it as part of the conference. But I wanted to mention in passing that another great thing about having studied public health was being able to bring my interest in development into my research. My thesis was on how Australian TV news and current affairs covers health stories from low and middle income countries. So I watched a lot of television and then I wrote about it, and trust me, that's not nearly as cushy as it actually sounds. While I was doing my PhD, I had the opportunity to be on the board of Oxfam Australia. At the time, you had to be a member of Oxfam, which I had been for some years, to run and also to vote for board election. And I'd always loved being on committees, so hey, the board seemed like the next logical step. And I should point out this was a volunteer role. You're probably seeing a bit of a theme here. And while I wasn't completely wrong about all of that, I wasn't completely right either. I was on the board for a 4-year term. It took me most of those 4 years to fully get my head around the distinctive way that boards think, as well as to keep across the content of the work, because while you want to be able to do your best by your organisation, at the end of the day, you as a board member are also legally liable. So when I was about finished my PhD, I started applying for jobs, being quite targeted, selecting ones that were well within my skill set, many of which specified PhD preferred. And like many women, I usually wouldn't apply unless I met about 95% of the job specification. During this time, I was doing some volunteer work as well, this time for the Oxbridge Human Development Research Group, which, as the name perhaps suggests, was set up mainly by Cambridge and Oxford postgrad students to connect development organisations that needed research done and students or alumni willing and able to do it. I'm not sure if OHDRG is still active, but they're just a good example of the kind of slightly left field opportunities that can be out there if you look and that can play to your strengths. So in the course of about 12 months, I lodged maybe 2 job applications a week. I had, across those 12 months, maybe 2 auto replies acknowledging receipt of my applications. Otherwise, no feedback, no interviews, nothing. And these were roles in Australia and overseas as well, and that was completely crushing. I began to think about whether I should just do something else. You know, apparently the sector didn't want me, and it's something I actually got quite sour about, as anyone around me at the time will tell you. I could only really sustain that thinking for about 5 minutes before I'd end up in a kind of low-level panic, because this was what I really wanted to do. So I stuck at it. So because I couldn't seem to get a job in the sector, I shifted into consulting. I was charmingly unaware at the time that consulting is usually something you do after you've done a specific thing for years, become expert at it, and you're just sick of working for the man and you'd rather people called you about work rather than you calling them. So before you ask what a consultant actually is, and good question, in my experience, it's either where an organisation brings in someone to do a time-bound piece of work for which they don't need a staff member long-term, or as in the case of the work I did for UNICEF Bangladesh, which was a partnerships review, they might actually need someone to come in from outside without prior connections or preconceived ideas and bring a fresh set of eyes. Sometimes consultants work as part of a team, sometimes on their own. Depending on how you work, if it's independently or for a company, you might be asked to help put together the team. It's always a bit different. I got a couple of assignments through a mixture of chutzpah and sheer luck. I stumbled about quite a bit online, finding out who and what was out there, which was actually quite a useful exercise in itself. And I interacted with a lot of consultants on LinkedIn. I was initially reticent to do that. I guess I was worried, as we all are, about being rejected, but almost everybody I contacted was at least happy to connect, if not meet up or have a phone conversation. And looking back, that was really helpful as well. It showed me that people in this area of the sector were pretty friendly, and ultimately, who wants to potentially work with people who aren't at least nice? So then I got sidetracked for about 18 months into a job, not a consulting gig. I sort of stumbled into this one as well, for Results International Australia, which is an international development advocacy NGO that brings together high-level staff-led advocacy and nationwide citizen-led advocacy toward ending global poverty. A big focus for a lot of Results' advocacy is around Australian contributions to the large multilateral funds, like, if you've heard of them, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. And I've worked on previous domestic replenishment campaigns for both of those. And this role lasted until the money to fund it ran out, which is really a not at all uncommon experience in this sector. So my focus at Results was advocacy on tuberculosis. by the way, once again, the world's deadliest infectious disease. And that set me up well for what followed, which was technically, again, a consulting gig for the Stop TB Partnership, which is a UN agency based in Geneva. I was brought in the lead up to the UN high-level meeting on TB in September 2018, and I stayed at Stop TB for about 12 months. And when I got back to Australia, in amazingly good timing, given the year we've just had, I returned to results and worked on a couple of vaccine-related projects, including the replenishment of Gavi, which I mentioned earlier, and the sector-wide End COVID for All campaign, which saw the first increases, albeit temporary, to Australian aid in about the last 5 years. That contract ended just before Christmas, and since February I've been working at the Specialist Health Service, or SHS. We sit under an organisation called ACFID Associates, which is one of the contents of that mystery bag called Managing Contractors that Emily mentioned in her introduction. And SHS, as the name suggests, provides specialist health advice to DFAT. All of that is a thing because, as you may know, there used to be an agency called AusAid that ran the Australian aid program until about 5 or 10 years ago when it was rolled into DFAT. And at that time, a lot of specialist positions disappeared, specialist knowledge left, and that function was outsourced. What's now SHS has existed in a few different incarnations, the current one of which has been under contract to ACFID for the last 6 years. SHS finishes in the middle of next year, and then it will be retendered, and whatever follows might be run by ACFID again or by another managing contractor. So Emily's asked us to talk a little bit about what we do on a day-to-day basis. There are 7 of us at SHS. We're a mix of technical and logistics staff, and there are 2 main strands to our work. So where there are short pieces of work, so a couple of days or so, we do that in-house. And that's either something that's been requested by DFAT staff at post or in Canberra. And together with the relevant section at DFAT, we develop a TOR, we agree on the content and timelines, submit them some drafts, get feedback that goes back and forth for a while, and then we work towards a finished document that they can then take away and use. And for longer pieces of work, so over weeks or months, or where there's a need for long-term specialist advice, we go to the health panel, as it's called, which we manage. It's one of the number of specialist DFAT panels. It's basically a pool of pre-vetted candidates with specialist skills across a broad range of areas in health. And based on what DFAT needs, again, we work with them to develop the TOR. We locate potential candidates in the panel, help them select the person if that's something that they need us to help them with, and then handle the contracting, and if it's part of the job, the logistics of actually getting the person in country. So that's me to date. To close out, just some hints and tips from all of this in no particular order. Echoing what Leah said, consider getting some specific skills. That's why I picked public health. You might choose M&E or policy or some other area, including some of the ones that Emily mentioned at the start. And you might consider getting a mentor. That will likely be free. And perhaps you could consider working with a career coach. Probably not free, depending on where you are in your journey, what questions and difficulties you might have. Although this might sound strange coming from me, consider getting some qualifications beside your degrees, because they aren't the only pieces of paper worth having. So, for example, I have a Cert 4 in Assessment and Workplace Training and a certificate in Teaching English as a Foreign Language. In both cases, I was interested in the content and I thought they'd be useful, and you should pick whatever's interesting and useful to you. A slightly larger commitment, consider getting a foreign language skill or skills. This is something Australians so often don't do because we don't have to. The world bends to us and our Anglophone tendencies. And while it's the case that almost all the professional environments you're likely to work in will use English, if you end up working in a context where English is only one of several languages used, or perhaps isn't much used at all, your life is going to be easier and better, and you will make a more positive contribution to the place you're in if you're willing to have a go and perhaps even develop some real competence in a local language. As to which language, that depends on what skills in language you may already have, where you might be interested in working. As a starting point, I'd say consider one of the other 5 official UN languages. Depending on the duty station, language skills often appear in UN position descriptions as a desirable trait for job candidates, so you're helping yourself as well. I'd say also read a lot of news, general global news and sector-specific stuff as well. If you're here today, you're likely interested enough, so this won't be a problem for you, and just reading about international stuff is just so interesting anyway. And finally, when you write up your CV, you should absolutely include your volunteering and your internships in terms of what you achieved and the skills you gained, just the same way as you would for any of your jobs. It's worth saying that I still do some volunteering for results because I personally enjoy taking part in advocacy for the AID program. It's real and meaningful work. I get to do it with others and it has tangible and powerful outcomes. All of those tick the boxes for me. And as I've mentioned, my time on the Oxfam board, both my election monitoring trips, which I didn't get to mention, they're all volunteer stints. You just find the things you really want to do and where you can add value. I think I've probably talked enough and fast enough for long enough that, Emily, I'm going to hand back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was fantastic. And you can really see the range of experiences that are available in the sector and how sometimes it's not just persistence to make change in other places, but also in our own careers as well. So thank you for that honesty and those tips and advice at the end too. So we're rapidly running out of time. So I know that there are lots of questions. So we'll jump straight into them. And if there are any more at the end, as I said at the beginning, please feel free to contact us directly. I'm sure all of us would be happy to link up with you afterwards. So Leah, I might just pass this one over to you, but we've had a question of what would you recommend for graduates from international backgrounds to finding a pathway into the aid industry? Have you got any thoughts on this? There's often some blockages.
Sure. Thanks. I'll just make it brief. I think the one pathway that I'd advise is networking. With everything going virtual, it's been a new opportunity as we've been getting consultants to do work for us overseas. They're needing counterparts who can speak local language. And I think that any person with an international background wanting to make an entry into the global international development work, that's one place that you should be on the lookout for. The advantage that you'd bring with your expertise on local context, or even just the ability to speak the language, in enabling somebody who is more seasoned in consultancies, and the process of that would enable you also to grow in that particular field. That's one area to look out for.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, that local knowledge and experience is really, really valuable, and I think becoming more so at the moment. So something to think about, and look for organisations that are working in areas that you have experience in as well. Michelle, I wonder if you just want to speak briefly to any recommendations for current PhD students who'd like to transition into the development sector. Obviously trying to translate some of those research skills, often quite specific. Any advice for those at that point in time?
Sure. I would say, in terms of looking to make a transition, start looking for jobs and start networking. And I didn't do this, so I can say it from hard experience. Start doing all that well before you finish. No point finishing and then going, I've got this, now I'll go get a job, because there's a lot of lag, especially if you're kind of moving yourself really out of academia into a new or newish field. And you can keep networking while you're studying on LinkedIn by going to events. I think you're going to mention a couple of groups that do networking. So a lot of these things are doable while you're studying. The research skills are increasingly valuable everywhere. So you've got that, that's great. And I would say it's about how you talk about what you've done, but so the research skills, obviously, persistence. You've got persistence. You've done this every day for 3 or 4 years, even when it was hard, which is most of the time. And if you've done that, well, you're likely to be able to persist at whatever else you go on to do. And essentially what you've done for those 3 or 4 years too is entirely self-manage a project that you set up from scratch and saw through to the end. And someone mentioned in the chat about project management, we increasingly all need at least some of a few skills like project management. Well, even if you're not a project management specialist, you can easily talk about how the PhD, as I said, got you from absolute scratch to completed, and you ran that. Other things I can suggest. I'm coming back to the networking at 4, so I'm happy to talk to people about it further, or I'll check the chat and see what comes up. But off the top of my head, there's probably good starts. Thanks.
Fantastic, Michelle. Thank you. Yes, I know Michelle and I and possibly Leah will be at the networking event, so happy to chat more too. Leah, just quickly, maybe you can jump in on this one, and then we might have to wrap it up, although I will put some information about internships up as well in a minute. I've seen that question. But there's a question about, should we go advocacy, topic-based or skills-focused more? And this is one that often comes up. And how do you actually get those practical skills, say in M&E, if that hasn't been your degree? And I know you mentioned, specialisation and the importance of that, or the role that that can have. So keen for your thoughts in kind of what are the areas at the moment that people might be looking to specialise in?
Thanks for that question. For someone who is just starting out, I would suggest go skills focused. It's easy. You get to find something that you can do immediately. Advocacy, from my experience, even after all these years of working, I feel that it's not something that you get into immediately as a new entrant. It's something that over the years you begin to see how you can, align yourself or work in the field better. Topic-based as well. So the skills-based and topic-based, I think those are the two areas. You'll find that there are areas where, for example, specialization is required in child safeguarding, for example, or in gender or in disability inclusion. Those will always be important in the sector. And if it's skills-based in a particular area, like data entry, data management, M&E of some sorts, that's also another area that is an easy pathway when you're entering as a new graduate or somebody who's not had past experience in the sector.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leah. So if you do have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or like we've said, join us at the networking opportunity this afternoon. But I just thought before we finish, I wanted to share with you some other opportunities and events that are out there. So let me just put these up here as well, because I know that practical tips and things to actually go and do are really, really helpful. So these are a few of the networks that you might like to consider joining, even while you're still studying. Many of these are open to students. So obviously the RDI network is great for those already working in academia or who might want to go down a more of a research route. Women in Aid and Development is a great network, and it's focused on supporting people who identify as women in developing their careers, and provides some of the mentoring and networking opportunities that Michelle was mentioning. They're very welcoming of students, so come along to that. If you're interested in disability inclusion and building your knowledge in that area, you might want to look up the Australian Disability and Development Consortium. And finally, if you're interested specifically in humanitarian response and disaster response, which we haven't touched on a lot today, but the Humanitarian Advisory Group runs some networking events and have lots of really fantastic research and support for early practitioners. So coming up, there are a few events to keep your eyes out for. Women in Aid and Development are having networking drinks in July on a topic that is very relevant to this session, although they may at this point all be online thanks to COVID. But keep an eye out on their website. There's Humanitarian Action Group drinks once a month for those of you in Melbourne, and ACFID will be holding its annual conference in September, which is a great way to meet people. There are student tickets available and you can kind of hear what's being talked about across the sector. And last of all, just for those of you who are looking for some other places, volunteering, Australian Volunteers is a really good one. Also in terms of internships, take a look at the Australian National Internships Program, which is run out of ANU but is open to other university students as well, postgrad and undergrad. And there's some other networks, including places to look for jobs. I'd encourage you to just get out there and see what's there, meet up with people who are working in the sector, come along this afternoon to the networking, and happy to share with you all. But just to finish up, thanks again so much to Leah and Michelle for sharing their own reflections. Thank you to everyone for your questions and for coming along and participating. I really wish you all the best in your studies, and good luck finding a job or wherever it takes you in the future. But thanks again. So I'll hand it back over to you now, Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And I'd like to thank you and ACFID and Michelle and Leah for this event. And of course, thank you to all the attendees for your active participation. And as mentioned, if you'd like to continue these discussions, Emily and Michelle will be attending the networking event at 4 p.m. this afternoon. But the next session is starting in 4 minutes. We have a design sprint for impact workshop and an impact for food security panel event. So I encourage you all to head over to the Hoover agenda to get to the next sessions. Thank you all. Enjoy the next few sessions, and I'll see you at the networking event later today.